Hey everybody, welcome back to Tenta Outdoors. My name's Al Tenta. In today's video, we're doing another recap on Season 10, Episode 6 of Alone. Stick around. Including myself, there are 5 contestants remaining on this season. So Episode 6 began with Taz. So in the previous episode, Taz lost his gill net. It washed away after a really stormy evening. And this episode begins with him constructing another gill net, not out of monofilament like his last one, but of the inner strands of paracord. You gotta like Taz. He's got such a great attitude and nothing seems to get this guy down. He also constructs a massive moose collar out of a giant piece of birch bark, and they showed him just bellowing a female moose call. He then checks his food cache way up in the tree. His food is okay, it's untouched, but he does notice that there's some maggots on his pieces of meat, and he brushes them off. He then checks his gill net. Unfortunately, it's empty, and he's concerned that the fish are moving into deeper water as the weather gets colder. Given this information, he decides to go bow hunting. Now he realizes that it's a bit of a risk expending those calories cruising through the bush in northern Saskatchewan, but he feels that it's a risk that he's willing to take in order to get more protein. As he's hunting, he comes upon a spruce grouse up in a tree. He takes several shots at the grouse. Unfortunately, he misses, but he is able to recover both his arrows. On his way back, he notices that the grouse is still there, and he makes a successful shot on the grouse and is able to harvest it. On his way back to camp, Taz sees another grouse, and he makes a good shot and is able to harvest 2 grouse. With these 2 kills, he's feeling very confident and believes he is able to win this competition. Once he's back at camp, he continues to work on his shelter. Now, he named his shelter Spruce Grouse Lodge. And then they show him playing chess with himself on a chessboard that he created on a box that he found. So Taz has a few days worth of food in storage, but he is concerned about long-term food procurement. He also needs to finish his shelter, he needs to make a door, and he's still working on one of the walls of his shelter. Taz then goes on to talk about the other 4 contestants left in the game. He makes some comments about how he feels they're doing at this particular time. Then he makes a comment about me. He says, I'm a good hunter, but I didn't gain much weight for the competition. Now, Taz might not be aware of this, but I did gain over 40 pounds coming into this game. Next up on episode 6, we focus in on Wyatt. I may be a little bit biased because he is a fellow Canadian, but nevertheless, I'm really enjoying watching Wyatt. So the episode starts with Wyatt pulling in a nice lake trout stuck in his gill net. Unfortunately, that catch really kind of messed up his gill net, and it looks like it was tangled and torn beyond repair. So what does Wyatt do? He builds a new one. Now this net that he created, he took his time with. He learned some things to do differently the first time he made one, and he's extremely happy with it. And I gotta say, it looks awesome. He spoke about how a lot of things in this environment he did not expect, but he's able to adapt and change and make things work. He also mentioned that he's going to begin rationing his food. Wyatt talked about a shelter. He discussed how it's adequate but not elaborate. This is an important point to consider with Wyatt because he has not blown excess calories constructing an elaborate shelter. So day 26, Wyatt heads down to check his gill net, and he catches an absolute leviathan. It is a massive pike in his gill net. It looks to me like it's about a 20 to 30 pound pike. Not sure, I don't think we ever got an official weight on that thing, but it was massive. So that pike will give Wyatt 10,000 calories and 10 days worth of food. They then show Wyatt processing his fish and smoking it over the fire. Day 29, an incredible windstorm. Wyatt talks about how he's never seen wind persist that long and be that powerful. So he's just chilling in his shelter, waiting for the storm to pass. So next up on the episode, we have Mikey. Now Mikey's been hit with a bout of insomnia, possibly from a lack of protein. He makes some impressive sharpening stones for his knives and actually achieves a razor's edge, demonstrated by him shaving the hair off his arm. Today, Mikey's focused on food, and he mentions he's not thinking straight. So Mike heads out with his bow to do some foraging and hunting, and he finds a piece of plywood with nails in it. And he utilizes this plywood to make like a back door or a back wall for his shelter. Mike then went on to talk about how when he was a kid, he had no services. He didn't have running water. They dug a well by hand. He remembers doing homework by candlelight, and he had no electricity. And he promises that his kids will not have to deal with that. And he's going to work hard and suffer so his kids don't have to. Day 29, Mike decides to hang out in a shelter, and to keep his mind occupied, he makes a set of dice. At 5 o'clock, Mike's done with being in his shelter. He grabs his bow and heads out hunting. He discusses how he believes that hunting is strictly about luck. And his luck is good because he comes upon a grouse and is able to harvest it on his very first shot. The next scene, they show Mikey in his shelter creating a charcoal ink out of some glass bottles he found, and he writes a letter to his wife on birch bark paper. He discusses how he wishes he could spend more time with his family, and if he's able to win this competition, that $500,000 would give him the opportunity to spend more time with his loved ones. Next up in the episode, we have Mel. Mel begins constructing a really nice looking windbreak around her fire pit. They then show Mel collecting reindeer moss. Now, reindeer moss is edible and it contains some carbohydrates, but you have to boil it twice and then dry it, and you can crush it up into like a floury type substance, and she wants to use it as thickener in her soups and stews. Mel heads out to do some foraging for mushrooms and berries, and she comes across a burn, and this burn contains a lot of blueberries. So Mel is a living historian, and she talks about how actually living what she teaches is an amazing experience. So the storm hits, and Mel decides she's going to lay low in her shelter to conserve energy so she can return to the berry patch to harvest more blueberries. During the storm, the wood shed that Mel created in a previous episode broke and fell apart. That's due to being constructed to the trees that were swaying back and forth, and it broke the wool cordage that she was using. She decides just to kind of deconstruct it and separate the firewood from the materials that were used in the construction, and she's going to work on it later. So during the night, Mel recorded some personal thoughts and feelings on camera that she did not want shared. The rules of the show unfortunately state that we do not have that option, and the show decided to air that segment. So my part in this episode began with me eating fish organs. There were some comments online about me eating those raw. I assure you they were not raw. I fried them up in the bottom of my pot, so they were completely cooked. And believe it or not, they actually tasted pretty good. I always made sure I ate all the organs first because those will not last, and it'd be really difficult to smoke. And by this time in my experience, I was actually really starting to enjoy the flavor of the fish organs, believe it or not. It's kind of a 180 from the first episode where they showed me gagging on those fish eggs. They then showed me catching a series of fish, just quick little segments of catching a few fish and pulling them up on the rocks, and a voice overlay of me saying, "I've never felt so rich with food as I do right now." At that particular time in the game, I had more food that I could eat, so I knew that I had to start preserving it. So next up, they showed me constructing a teepee-style, moss-covered cold smoker. So about 4 feet up off the ground, I made a wire rack to lay my fish fillets on, skin side up. Now I wanted to make sure that these fish were cold smoked, not cooked. So it did take about 2 days to smoke the larger fish to a level that I felt would be safe for long-term storage. Something that they didn't show in the episode was I never left that smoker unattended. Even though it took 2 days to smoke some of those fish, even if they weren't smoked, I took them off and I stored them safely until I could start smoking again the next day, because I was very paranoid about the martins and the birds and the bears and whatever else likes to eat smoked fish getting into my smoker and stealing my fish. So to smoke those fish, I used primarily alder. When I started running low on alder, I used willow and some birch, but alder was definitely the best smelling smoke and just did a really good job smoking those fish. So once I smoked a few batches of fish, my plan was to not eat that fish and save that for later on in the game if I made it that far. When the fish stopped biting or the lake froze or whatever happened, I wanted that storage of food to get me further into the game. And any fish that I caught, I just wanted to eat fresh. Now there were a few days of really powerful wind, and it did make smoking very difficult. They showed that a little bit on the episode, but because my moss wasn't completely windproof, some of the wind would actually move through the moss and push all my smoke out the door or just away from my fish. So it did make it difficult, but it did still work. It just took a lot longer in the wind. So eventually I went back to my teepee and just kind of chilled and waited out the storm. The next scene shows me working on a new lure. Now the first lure I made, I called Lake Trout Baby 1. Now it had seen a lot of fish and a lot of abuse, and the paracord that I had tied onto the bottom, which gave it a really good motion in the water that the fish were attracted to, was all tangled and dirty, and I felt like I needed to replace that lure. So I built a new one. Now unfortunately, the edit didn't show the lure completed. They showed me holding up, it looked like just a piece of wire and 2 hooks. I hadn't actually attached the paracord or the piece of alder that I shaped into like a little fish head. That wasn't attached to the lure yet. It made it seem like I went fishing with just that wire and the hook, but that wasn't the case. It just wasn't quite finished yet. Then they showed me having a little bit of a sad attack. And yeah, I had sad attacks fairly often out there, but they didn't last too long. And I described it as almost like a pain in your chest, you know, when you just wanted to talk to one of your loved ones, you wanted to tell your wife the adventures you had been on. You wanted to talk to your kids about what you had seen and what you had done. And yeah, I had a moment there of sadness, but they happen frequently, and they pass quite quickly as well. So the episode ends with scenes of me fishing on my favorite fishing rock and getting very frustrated because I was continually hooking and losing fish. And I was getting really frustrated. And it was for no particular reason. It was just one of those nights. Now I think the episode only showed me losing 3 fish. In truth, I had hooked up and lost 6 fish that night. And I was very frustrated because I knew that each fish that I caught would bring me 2 days further into the game. So me hooking up with 6 fish and losing them all, potentially I lost 12 days of being in the competition. So I was really frustrated and had a little temper tantrum. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you are enjoying these videos, please consider subscribing to my channel. And don't forget to watch episode 7 next Thursday night on the History Channel. We'll see you next time.